With the year about to wrap, it's time for my top five lists for 2018. We're going to start off with the most contentious list of the bunch, I think, which is games that I think need a new edition. So to kick it off, let's start with what I think gets you on this list. There's two ways you can get into this list. First thing is the game has been out of production for so long, but people are still excited about playing it, and it deserves to be brought back, given a new polish, shine edition, whatever it is that gets it back on the table with new players playing it. Or it's at a stage in its life cycle where it simply needs to be revamped. What that could mean is that from its original release through to its current incarnation, so much has been bolted onto it or changed that at its core, it's either really hard to absorb now because there's so many added rules, things in books or things other places, or it's become very ponderous with so much information that it's no longer sort of the beast that it was, and it can become unapproachable for gamers. And it could just use a tidy up. So these are my two things that I think qualify you for being on this list. So let's kick it off with number 5. In the 5th spot, we have Malifaux 2nd Edition. This is a great example of a game of the second type that I was talking about, where the game has had so many releases and so many expansions in its life cycle now. In fact, it was launched right when I started this channel, that it's kind of become unapproachable for new players, and you can kind of feel that as its releases have been coming out and sort of the new iterations of its organized play have been happening as well. So what I'm excited about is they have actually announced they are doing a new edition, a 3rd edition of Malifaux, coming out hopefully sometime next year. We'll see what happens there, but of course, it's one of those games with a wonderful model line that's been completely redone in plastic now, tons of potential, and I think it just needs to be sort of reshuffled, made more approachable, and condensed back down into a single sort of streamlined play format where the information is, I guess, easier to come to if you're a new player, and hopefully with some repackaging and stuff too to help retailers sell it. In the number 4 spot, we have Confrontation. Now, this is a game that has recently come to crowdfunding about midway through the year with some promises to deliver a new edition that's both compatible with the older models and, of course, with a brand new line of models as well. I'm not excited about it. I really hope they do it justice, but it does need a new edition, as it was one of the I say, in the late 90s, it was a very seminal game for changing the way people looked at miniature wargaming, from being all about mass battles to having this sort of comfortable skirmish game that can fit on your kitchen table and can be played in just under an hour. So I'm really hoping that one comes back next year. Do think it needs a new edition. I just hope they do it justice. In the number 3 spot, we've got Battlefleet Gothic, one of my favorite all-time spaceship games. There is, in the recent years, sort of been an explosion of spaceship games, mostly licensed, some original sort of proprietary IPs as well. But with Games Workshop redoing its sort of core old catalog of games to mine nostalgia, I'm really hoping this is one they get to. I do feel like what's going to happen when they do redo it is it'll probably focus on a different time period than the previous one, not the Gothic War, but instead on the Horus Heresy. It's a sort of safe way for them to do a contained model line without too many units to get it started, and of course to sell and build new models as well. It is one of my favorite games that Games Workshop's produced in the last 30 years, so I do hope they do a great job of sort of capturing the original spirit of it and giving new players an opportunity to play it as well. In the number 2 spot, we have Mordheim. Oh, Mordheim. The game that, second to Infinity, I've played the most games of, I think, on this channel. And of course, one of the most popular skirmish war games of all time. I would say in a lot of ways even more popular than its sort of I guess, sister game, which is Necromunda, which actually came out before it. The one thing with Mordheim, I do hope it gets a new edition. I do hope that they sort of stay true to its roots of an interesting setting for a post-apocalyptic fantasy skirmish. I wouldn't mind if it was updated to the newer sort of setting for Warhammer, but at the same time, I've seen that they've had no fear in their specialist line with going back to kind of historical periods with the Horus Heresy stuff, and of course with Blood Bowl having its own setting. So I don't think they could not do Mordheim again, but I do think they've got a challenge ahead of them to sort of capture what it was and make it accessible to new players, while making it popular, of course, with the old crowd like myself that have played it forever. So I really do hope we see a new edition of Mordheim. It and Battlefleet Gothic are kind of the last two, until you start hitting board games that are in Games Workshop's library that they haven't redone yet. So we'll see how 2019 holds and whether or not we get a new edition. So on to number 1. The number 1 game that I think needs a new edition is War Machine and Hordes. My reasons for putting this top of the list have more to do with, I think, where the game has gotten to in the last even 2 editions, not even just this edition, but the last 2 editions. Having played all 3 editions of War Machine and Hordes, right back from the first edition, I would say that at this point, the game's size may be outgrowing the core mechanics of the game, with every model taking actions against every model. It feels about like where 2nd edition 40k was before it made the jump to 3rd edition, where it might be time to change it to a more streamlined rule set if you want to be playing with the same number of models, and with the current rule set, maybe scale back the amount of models being played with. I think that would do 2 great things for the business. It would allow them to sell more models to players that want to play big games, allow them to sell their old catalog and keep current games current game players happy by keeping around their core mechanics too. I do love the War Machine Horde setting. I love the miniatures. I painted a huge troll army this year, but I do think the game's in a place where it needs to diverge. The model count is no longer kind of supported by the amount of horsepower under the engine in the core mechanics of the game, and I think something needs to happen to split it off, where you can play a large mass combat game with all of your big collection of miniatures, hopefully on a 6-foot table, and make it scale up a bit more to sort of like the mass combat game, where I think it's slowly been gradually moving, but again, change the core engine underneath it, so that it isn't a model by model interaction, which slows down massively how big the game can kind of get to model count wise. And I hope we see more of that. I'd love to see some asymmetrical missions, some story driven missions, and the game kind of get to a place where it isn't, so I guess it isn't held back by its core mechanics, which were more built for a skirmish game when it initially launched in 2003. So yeah, that's my number 1 wish for a new edition of a game. And it's not just maybe a new edition, it's that it is a new edition. I would like to see War Machine Hordes become the mass combat game it's been growing into, as opposed to staying the skirmish game. And you can keep the skirmish game as well. Keep the current mechanics and current rules for a slimmed down, maybe 15 to 20 model count game, as opposed to the game can be played with like 30, 40, 50 miniatures at this point. So there it is, my top 5 list for games that I think need a new edition. Tell me in the comments below what you think and what your top 5 list would be for games that you think deserve a new edition in 2019. We'll see you for the list tomorrow. Until then, I'm Ash. Albert Gaming. I hope you enjoyed that video. If you want to support the channel, of course, like and subscribe and hit the little bell below so you get notifications when I post future content. I do post stuff 7 days a week. If you want to support the channel further, you can, of course, buy a t-shirt through Spreadshirts, buy a measuring gauge or objective markers from Death Ray Designs, or, of course, most importantly, there is Patreon. Patreon is what makes all this possible, keeps the lights on, pays for the studio costs, pays for the equipment, model costs, and everything else, and most importantly, puts food in my kids' bellies and a roof over their heads. Big thanks to everyone, past, future, who supported me. I do this stuff because of you guys, and of course, I will continue doing it as long as I can.